The world, they say, is made of concrete and steel, of hard facts and even harder calculations. But I, Anya Petrova, learned that even the most meticulously built lives are actually constructed from fragile threads of faith and lies. For 3 years, my foundation was built on what I believed to be unshakable ground: a brilliant career, a life of enviable luxury, and a love that felt as expansive and limitless as the skyline of Manhattan where we resided. I was a top forensic accountant, a specialist sought by federal agencies. It's my worth measured not in the dollars I earned, but in the crimes I could untangle. My gift was seeing what others missed: the flicker of a hidden ledger, the ghost in the machine, the single misplaced zero that betrayed a billion-dollar deception. I believed in numbers. I believed in truth. That was my first mistake. My fiancé Elias Thorne was the architect of my seemingly perfect world, the founder and CEO of Chronos Global, tech firm whose innovative market predictions had turned him into a global sensation before he turned 35. He was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, the man who spoke on economic panels in Davos and dined with presidents. He was brilliant, charming, and possessed an intensity that made every room he entered feel suddenly brighter, or perhaps simply smaller. Our life was a magazine spread, the sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, the weekends in our secluded Hamptons estate, the engagement ring that practically demanded its own security detail. He often called me his anchor in the chaos, the only person whose intellect could truly keep pace with his. And I, basking in the reflection of his success, accepted the title. I mistook his need for my skill as genuine affection. The wedding was set for 6 months away, a spectacular affair in Lake Como, meant to cement the union of two of the modern world's supposed power players. Invitations were sent, RSVPs were pouring in, and the final list of attendees read like a roll call of global influence. Yet, beneath the veneer of gilded happiness, a persistent, cold doubt had begun to take hold of me. It wasn't the kind of doubt that whispered in the quiet hours of the night. It was a professional curiosity, a silent alarm bell triggered not by emotion, but by observation. Elias was meticulous, excessively so, even for a CEO of his caliber. His phone was a fortress, his schedule a closely guarded secret. And his frequent, unexplained trips, always cloaked in the vague necessity of investor relations, had started to feel less like business travel and more like calculated disappearances. I knew the difference between professional discretion and deliberate concealment. As a forensic expert, I lived in the space between those two ideas. My job was to turn over every rock, to question every assumption, to trust absolutely no one, especially not the smiling face across the table. But when that smiling face belonged to the man you shared your life with, the cognitive dissonance became a heavy physical thing. Pressing down on my professional instincts, I told myself it was fatigue, the stress of planning a high-profile wedding while managing 2 complex cases simultaneously. I tried to rationalize the secrecy as Elias protecting his intellectual property, his edge in the cutthroat world of tech. The turning point arrived not in a flash of drama, but in the sterile blue light of a monitor screen, buried deep within a routine audit I was conducting for an external client. The client, a mid-tier venture capital firm, was acquiring a smaller data security startup. Elias had casually mentioned he had invested heavily in this particular VC firm years ago. Out of idle curiosity, or perhaps the creeping unease I'd been suppressing, I decided to run a cross-reference, a forensic technique where I mapped the cash flow patterns of 2 unrelated entities, simply to see if they ever touched. It's the equivalent of checking footprints across 2 separate crimes to see if the same shoe made both marks. What I found was insignificant to the untrained eye. It wasn't a large transaction. In the swirling vortex of multi-million-dollar deals I analyzed daily, it was barely a ripple. Buried 4 layers deep in a holding company's expense records, a company connected to the VC firm was a wire transfer, dated exactly 3 months ago. The amount, $100,000. The recipient, an offshore account registered to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, codenamed Echo Point. $100,000 for a man like Elias, who could spend 10 times that amount on a rare bottle of wine. It was pocket change. The number itself wasn't the problem. The placement was the problem. It was wired not as an investment, not as a contract payment, but logged meticulously in the internal ledger as a miscellaneous consulting fee. Q2. Elias never dealt with miscellaneous anything. His finances were hyper-organized, categorized down to the penny by dedicated high-level accountants. This small fee, tucked away in a less than reputable subsidiary of a firm he loosely controlled, was professionally insulting. It was messy. It was amateur. And yet it screamed deliberate avoidance. I traced the wire back using my privileged access to various banking protocols. The $100,000 had originated not from Kronos Global's primary operations, nor from any of Elias's known personal accounts. It came from a third-tier holding company in Luxembourg. One I recognized as part of a complex, layered structure Elias used for highly sensitive, though ostensibly legal, overseas patent litigation. This was a structure so complicated that even his own internal auditors had difficulty fully mapping it, which, of course, was precisely the point. The transaction path was circuitous, masterpiece of digital misdirection that touched 3 different international currencies before settling into the Echo Point account. Whoever executed this had knowledge of global financial obfuscation that rivaled my own. But here was the fatal flaw. The final registration of the consulting fee contained a formatting error in the transaction code, one I recognized from an entirely different industry. Marker used primarily in large-scale government procurement contracts, specifically military hardware. This was the moment the blood went cold in my veins. A simple, personal transaction for $100,000 was using a financial marker reserved for the purchase of fighter jets or complex defense systems. It was like finding a receipt for a private tutoring session inside the accounting files for a nuclear submarine project. The two concepts could not intersect logically unless the underlying operation was designed to deceive at a fundamental level. I closed the audit file, my heart hammering a sudden, irregular rhythm against my ribs. The logical, forensic part of my mind took over, building the case piece by piece. Forget the money. Focus on the anomaly. Why would Elias need to hide such a small amount of money through such an elaborate, high-risk channel? The answer was chilling because the transaction was a signal. It was not the payment itself, but the confirmation of a much larger, darker delta, financial equivalent of a handshake, recorded just elaborately enough to be obscured from public view, but carelessly enough for a specialist like me to spot the professional fingerprint. That night, the sleek, modern lines of our penthouse felt less like a home and more like an opulent cage. Elias came home late, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and an air of detached excitement he often wore after a successful negotiation. He found me in the kitchen, nursing a glass of wine, staring out at the constellation of city lights. "Still crunching numbers, Anya?" he asked, his voice smooth and indulgent. He placed a hand on my shoulder, the weight of his engagement ring heavy against my skin. "You need to relax, darling. The world of finance will still be there tomorrow." "I was just looking over some old reports," I replied, my voice perfectly neutral, a tone I had mastered during cross-examinations. An anomaly came up in the Q2 files of that Luxembourg firm. A consulting fee. $100,000. I couldn't place the contract. I held my breath, waiting for the flicker, the hesitation, the tell that I knew every skilled deceiver possessed. Elias didn't miss a beat. His smile didn't waver. His grip on my shoulder remained comfortably firm. "Ah, that's just a standard expense," he dismissed with a light laugh, pulling away to pour himself a whiskey. "Something my legal team handled months ago. Probably a settlement for a patent spat with a European rival. Nothing for a genius like you to worry your beautiful head over. Leave the messy paperwork to the underlings." He tried to dismiss it as mundane, to make me feel small and overly focused. But his explanation contained 2 small forensic inconsistencies. First, his legal team never filed under miscellaneous consulting fee. They used highly specific liability codes. Second, and more critically, he had just claimed an intimate knowledge of a transaction he had previously implied was too trivial to recall. The lie, delivered with such practiced ease, felt like a physical blow. It was the first solid piece of evidence I had against the man I was supposed to marry. And it wasn't the transaction itself that condemned him, but his smooth, immediate, and utterly false recollection of it. The man I loved was a stranger, and the life we shared was a meticulously financed theatrical production. From that night forward, my priorities shifted entirely. The wedding planner's calls went unanswered. The venue confirmations became irrelevant. My focus narrowed to a single, terrifying objective. I had to know what the $100,000 was confirming and to whom. I was no longer a fiancé. I was a double agent operating behind enemy lines, and the enemy shared my bed. My professional life had taught me the rules of engagement in a financial war. Never leave a paper trail. Never operate from your own network, and never ever trust a verbal assurance. I meticulously planned my counter-investigation. First, I had to establish my operational base. I knew Elias's security systems were state-of-the-art complex. Layered digital fortress monitored by Kronos's top security team. Operating from the penthouse, using our shared Wi-Fi or any device connected to his network, was suicide. I secretly purchased an untraceable satellite laptop, secured with triple-layer encryption, and disguised it in the most innocuous way possible, locked inside an empty, ornate jewelry box in the back of my closet, masked by signal jamming lining. I powered it only during the narrow window between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. The only 2 hours Elias's sleep tracker showed a reliable, deep sleep cycle. Next, I needed data access. As his fiancé and partner, I had a certain level of organic built-in access. I knew the general structure of Kronos's financial systems. But the real secrets would be buried in a private, segregated server, one inaccessible even to his chief financial officer. My key was his assistant, a nervous young woman named Chloe who handled all his personal, high-level administrative tasks. I began subtly probing Chloe, not for information about Elias, but about her own career aspirations. Over casual midday lunch, as carefully paid for by my own business, I established a quiet rapport. I spoke to her about the future, about how a good assistant needed to anticipate, not just react. I mentioned in passing how impressive it would be for her to become proficient in his digital filing structure. Citing a minor fictional inconvenience I'd once had with a misplaced legal document, I subtly praised her efficiency, suggesting she ask Elias to grant her read-only access to his historical financial server, ostensibly so she could better manage his tax documentation. My suggestion was a classic forensic maneuver, using vanity as a Trojan horse. Chloe, flattered and eager to prove her competence, followed my advice. Days later, she happily announced to me that Elias, preoccupied with his major new European deal, had granted her limited access. She had given me the keys to the outer door. The next hurdle was the internal network's firewall structure. Elias used an advanced quantum-based security protocol that was virtually impossible to brute force. But I knew the flaw in every system is the human who programs it. I recalled a conversation 6 months prior, a late-night talk over chess, where Elias, slightly intoxicated and boasting, had described his customized security philosophy, comparing the system's access layers to a Russian nesting doll. He had mentioned the one element he always kept simple, the core weakness he relied on: temporal encryption keys. Essentially, the system relied on the changing time-of-day access patterns, requiring a manual, often predictable daily override password. This override, designed for his personal, high-level remote logins, was the key to moving beyond Chloe's read-only status. The password itself was a rolling code, impossible to guess. But the prompt for the code was static, a unique alphanumeric string that changed only with the season. We were in late fall. The seasonal key prompt would be the same until the winter solstice. It took me for sleepless nights and approximately 30 hours of uninterrupted, high-concentration forensic work to bypass the temporal code. I used a sophisticated zero-trace packet sniffing program I developed years ago. Installing it temporarily on a refurbished server Kronos was donating to a local university. The server, being prepped for donation, was outside the Kronos firewall, but still within the local datasphere. The sniffing program did its job. It captured a single, fleeting instance of the alphanumeric seasonal key when Elias remotely logged in to approve a massive wire transfer for the European deal he'd mentioned. The key was a complex string, but within it I saw the personal signature, a sequence of digits that corresponded exactly to the date and time of our first official business meeting, a time Elias often referred to as the moment our orbits aligned. It was a bizarre, narcissistic choice for a security key, but it confirmed the human element, the ego-driven flaw that I needed now with the seasonal access key in hand. I could bypass the system's outer defense, but the deepest secrets I knew lay not in the financial server, but in the separate, classified database he used for his intellectual property and, more worryingly, his personal communication logs. This classified database, codenamed Excalibur, was what I needed to confirm the nature of the $100,000 anomaly. Was it just a patent payoff, or was it something truly nefarious? I needed to find a direct link between Echo Point and Excalibur. My breakthrough came not through technology, but through observation of Elias's physical habits. He had a custom-built home office, heavily shielded against electronic intrusion, a true Faraday cage designed to prevent signal leakage. I realized that if the room was truly impenetrable, there must be a physical link to the Excalibur database. He wasn't connecting wirelessly. During a casual evening, while Elias was distracted by a virtual reality game, I quickly and quietly examined the back of his massive mahogany desk. There, hidden behind a discrete panel, was a single, unused Ethernet port data transfer line that ran directly through the building's specialized fiber optic conduit to a secure off-site location, likely one of his numerous Kronos auxiliary offices. This physical line was the access point. I realized I couldn't just plug my disguised laptop in. His system would instantly flag the intrusion. I needed a non-network tool, something that could act as a secure bridge. The solution was an air-gapped signal repeater, a highly illegal piece of hardware, capable of siphoning a small data payload without leaving a digital footprint on the host system. My old network of forensic contacts owed me many favors. It took 3 days to international calls and a hefty, untraceable cash payment. But the repeater disguised inside a high-end air purifier unit was delivered. The air purifier was placed in the corner of his office, seemingly innocuous. But deep within its housing, the signal repeater was actively listening. It was designed not to steal data, but to perform a passive handshake to map the data packet signatures as they left the Excalibur database. My target signature was the alphanumeric code for Echo Point, the Cayman Island shell company. The wait was agonizing. Elias often spent hours locked in his office, his communications shielded. I couldn't monitor the repeater from the penthouse. The risk of his security system flagging the outbound signal was too high. I had to physically retrieve the data stick from the repeater. I set my opportunity for the following Saturday morning. Elias was scheduled to fly to Zurich for a critical bank meeting and wouldn't return until late Saturday morning. 6 a.m., Elias kissed me goodbye, his eyes already distant, focused on the jet lag and the impending deal. "Don't worry about a thing, darling. Just relax. I'll be back soon." His voice was laced with a familiar, empty promise of care. I returned a kiss, my smile professional and cold. "Be safe, Elias. I'll be here when you get back." The lie tasted like ashdot as soon as his private jet cleared the New York airspace, confirmed by a simple public flight tracker I had running on my phone. I moved. I retrieved the tiny air-gapped data stick from the air purifier. My hands were steady, trained by years of handling delicate evidence. I retreated to my disguised satellite laptop, sealed in its Faraday-caged jewelry box. I inserted the data stick. The laptop, isolated from the world, began to process the passive handshake data. The entire purpose of this maneuver was simple: to determine if the Echo Point transaction data that small, $100,000 signal, had passed through the highly classified Excalibur database. If it was just a legal patent issue, the data would have been housed in his patent litigation server. If it had passed through Excalibur, it meant the nature of the transaction was classified by national security standards, which meant it wasn't just corporate fraud. It was something far more dangerous. The screen flickered. The data stream was complex, a waterfall of encrypted packets. Then a match. Not just a trace, but a clear, time-stamped routing confirmation of the Echo Point data. Stamped by the Excalibur server itself. But that wasn't the worst of it. The data packet contained more than just the Echo Point signature. It carried a destination tag I had never seen before, masked by several layers of proprietary Chronos encryption, using my most advanced decryption algorithms, the ones I developed while consulting for the Department of Defense. Peeled back the layers. The final destination was not a private bank or a law firm. It was an account linked to a known foreign state-owned entity, one that had been publicly sanctioned by the U.S. government just 2 years prior for intellectual property theft and espionage. My breath hitched. The blood drained from my face, leaving me lightheaded. This wasn't financial fraud. This wasn't corporate crime. This was economic treason. Elias was not just stealing money. He was compromising the core technological secrets of the U.S. economy, selling them to a hostile foreign power. The $100,000 was the confirmation fee for a deal worth billions. I sat back, the reality of the situation hitting me with the force of a physical impact. The man I loved, the man I was going to marry, was not just a cheat or a fraudster. He was a traitor, and my quiet forensic investigation had just uncovered a global conspiracy that implicated the man whose name I was 6 months away from taking. My life of luxury, my belief in my judgment, everything was a lie. The only truth left was the cold, hard data on the screen. I was sleeping with the enemy, and if he discovered what I knew, the threat would escalate instantly from divorce to execution. The silence in the penthouse, once a symbol of our privileged tranquility, now felt like the oppressive pressure of the deep sea. The satellite laptop, secured back in its box, held not just evidence but the explosive confirmation that the man who shared my bed was actively dismantling national security for profit. Treason. The word itself was a chilling pronouncement that stripped away the last vestiges of my emotional denial. I was no longer dealing with a cheating husband or a corporate criminal. I was confronting a deeply embedded operative, and the stakes of this particular financial game had just become lethal. My own life, once a predictable equation of success and luxury, was now a variable in a geopolitical conflict. My first act was a cold, calculated inventory of my risk exposure. As a top forensic accountant, I had access to systems that few private citizens ever see. But Elias had access to something far more dangerous. Me. He knew my methods, my professional network, and the specific algorithms I relied on to hunt down hidden funds. He had spent 3 years studying my professional mind, and he had used our engagement as the perfect, unassailable cover for his operations. He didn't just love me, he vetted me. He had recruited me indirectly into the inner circle of his deception without my knowledge. I realized that every conversation we had ever had about my work, the casual debriefings, the professional boasts, the midnight discussions about the latest encryption techniques, was reconnaissance for him. He was building his fortress based on knowing exactly how I, the most dangerous threat to his finances, would try to breach it. This level of betrayal transcended the personal. It was an intellectual violation that ignited a focused, cold fury in my mind. I couldn't go to the authorities yet. The evidence I possessed, the data routing signature from the Excalibur server, linked to the foreign entity, was technically damning but structurally fragile. If I presented it now, Elias would deploy his considerable resources, his army of high-priced lawyers, his political influence, and his highly advanced digital security team to paint me as a disgruntled, unstable fiancé attempting to sabotage his reputation. The conspiracy was so vast, so deeply woven into the fabric of Kronos Global and its countless subsidiaries, that simply presenting a single complex data trail would be dismissed as a misunderstanding, or worse, deliberate manipulation. I would be silenced, discredited, and then likely eliminated. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof of the purpose behind the transaction. I needed the full, unredacted ledger. My next phase of investigation, which I grimly codenamed Operation Siphon, had to move beyond data passive collection and penetrate his operational methodology. I needed to understand what Kronos Global was actually selling, and how CHRONOS Global was ostensibly an artificial intelligence firm specializing in predictive market modeling. But my analysis of the Excalibur routing data suggested the intellectual property being siphoned was not merely financial algorithms. The size and frequency of the packets, even the compressed encrypted ones, were too large for pure data. They were consistent with highly complex infrastructural blueprints, the proprietary schematics of next-generation technology. I recalled a recent, highly publicized contract Elias had secured with a U.S. defense subcontractor, officially for logistical efficiency software. My forensic intuition screamed that this was the source. Elias wasn't just predicting markets. He was selling the intellectual foundation of America's next industrial revolution. I began to use my professional access as a weapon. I created a fictional deep cover consulting project for a completely unrelated client in Hong Kong. The project was designed to require immense processing power and data storage. The purpose of this was twofold. First, to provide a legitimate cover story for the inevitable increase in my own data consumption and late-night working hours. Second, and far more subtly, to create a technical justification for needing a temporary, high-speed data bridge between my home office and a remote, secure Kronos server farm specifically adjacent to the defense subcontractor's network access point. I pitched the idea to Elias over a candlelit dinner, framing it as a necessary security measure for my high-profile client. I need to route the calculations through your remote server architecture. Darling, I explained, my voice laced with a charming blend of technical competence and personal dependence. It's the only way to avoid the predictable latency issues, and it provides an extra layer of Kronos's world-class protection. Elias, pleased by my reliance on his company's technology and the implied flattery of its superiority, agreed without hesitation. He saw an opportunity to bring me closer into his sphere, reinforcing his perceived control. He quickly signed the necessary internal documents, giving me temporary, elevated network privileges he thought were limited to data processing, but which I knew could be leveraged for data surveillance. His mistake, once again, was ego. He believed his own security was impenetrable, and that my professional focus was strictly limited to my own client's work. He gave me the wire, never realizing I intended to use it to listen to his most sensitive conversations. Once the temporary data bridge was established, I implemented a complex silent monitoring program I had developed years ago, originally for tracing corporate insider trading. I deployed it not to capture data packets, but to log metadata specifically, the communication pathways and frequency of traffic, moving between Elias's private Excalibur server and the sanctioned foreign entities known IP addresses. Metadata is the unseen ghost of the digital world. It shows who is talking to whom, when, and how often. Without revealing the content, to Kronos' security, my high data consumption looked like complex client calculations. In reality, I was building a detailed map of Elias's treasonous communication grid. The results were terrifyingly consistent. The communication peaks did not align with market hours or business cycles. They aligned precisely with Elias's unexplained disappearances. The long weekends when he claimed to be hunting in Montana or attending an exclusive retreat in Monaco. During these windows, the data flow from Excalibur to the sanctioned foreign entities spiked dramatically. Almost a predictable rhythm of exchange. It was clear these trips were not social. They were operational handoffs. This rhythm of betrayal gave me an immense strategic advantage. Predictability is the Achilles heel of any high-stakes criminal operation. Elias had fallen into a routine, convinced that his digital security and my domestic cover provided an unbreakable shield. He had grown arrogant in his deception. I began tracking his movements with forensic precision. His private jet logs were publicly obscure, but the refueling stops, ground services, and specialized airport hangar rentals were not. Cross-referencing his metadata spikes with the actual physical location of his jet during those hours revealed a pattern of travel that bypassed traditional business hubs. He wasn't going to Zurich for bank meetings. He was using these cities as transit points for clandestine meetings in less secure, less scrutinized locations. The evidence suggested a primary operational hub was located in a former Soviet bloc Contria place, where Kronos Global had no discernible business interest. But where the sanctioned foreign entity had significant, covert influence, the tension in our shared space became almost unbearable. I had to maintain the illusion of the loving, dedicated fiancé, all while holding the knowledge that he was a traitor. Every evening, I would listen to him recount his fictional business successes, my professional mask fixed firmly in place. I learned to look him in the eye and listen not to his words, but to the silence and the calculated gaps in his narrative. I realized I had fallen in love with a fiction, a sophisticated mask built on ambition and deceit. The true Elias was the invisible wire, humming with betrayal beneath the surface. One particularly revealing night, Elias came home agitated after a call that he took in his soundproofed study, a call he had explicitly warned me never to interrupt. My metadata logger, however, was silently capturing the timing and duration of the call. The call lasted exactly 6 minutes and 37 seconds, and it originated from a highly secure, non-commercial satellite line. Later, while we were watching a movie, I casually mentioned a recent financial news story about an unexpected, large-scale stock acquisition by the very foreign entity I was tracking. Elias shrugged, completely relaxed. Market volatility, darling. Nothing new. They're just securing a bigger foothold in the tech space. But the timing was odd. I pressed lightly, my voice a model of idle curiosity. It coincided almost perfectly with your trip last week. You wouldn't happen to know anything about their acquisition strategy, would you? The shift in his demeanor was momentary, a subtle tightening around his eyes. A micro-expression of guarded hostility that vanished as quickly as it appeared. But I, the trained observer, had logged it. "Anya, I told you to relax," he said. His tone still indulgent, but carrying a faint, unmistakable edge of command. "My work is complex. You have your world, I have mine. Trust me to handle the high-level strategy." The request for trust was a calculated manipulation. He wasn't asking for emotional faith. He was demanding blind obedience to his operational compartmentalization. The message was clear: stay in your lane or you risk being run over. His dismissal fueled my determination. I realized that my most valuable asset was not my technical skill, but my ability to be underestimated. Elias saw me as the anchor, the brilliant but ultimately compliant extension of his perfect life. He couldn't conceive that I was using his own technology to track the decay of his empire. I shifted Operation Siphon to its next critical phase: asset identification. The treasonous data couldn't be transferred by Elias alone. He required a network of highly skilled, compartmentalized individuals who knew just enough to execute their specific tasks, but not enough to compromise the entire operation if they were caught. I spent the next 2 weeks cross-referencing Kronos's high security payroll against the satellite communication logs. I looked for employees who received exceptionally high, often irregular, bonuses designated as project completion. The list quickly narrowed to 3 individuals: a cryptographer, a network architect, And most surprisingly, a logistics manager. The logistics manager, a mild-mannered man named Marcus, was the key. His role was mundane, handling the shipping and secure transport of high-value computer components. But my metadata map showed that every time Elias traveled to the former Soviet bloc country, Marcus's personal cell phone, a burner I tracked through cellular tower triangulation, pinged in a small, isolated commercial airport near the operational hub. Marcus wasn't shipping hardware. He was the human conduit, transporting either physical data drives or, more likely, carrying encrypted authentication keys necessary to finalize the large-scale data transfers in person. He was the one piece of the puzzle that linked the digital Treason to the physical world. I needed to observe Marcus. Following him directly was far too risky. Elias's security team would spot me immediately. I leveraged my professional connections in the local law enforcement community contacts I had built over years of consulting on financial crimes. I didn't confess the full scope of the treason, but created a fictional narrative about a client who suspected Marcus of embezzling proprietary software on the side. This provided the necessary legal justification for a quiet, untraceable surveillance order on Marcus's movements and non-Chronos communications. The surveillance reports confirmed my darkest fears. Marcus was meeting with individuals who were known intelligence assets of the sanctioned foreign power. The meetings were short, cold, and always involved the transfer of a small, nondescript item, a flash drive, a hardshell case, or sometimes just a simple handshake that signaled a digital exchange. The final piece of the conspiracy that began to click into place was the financial mechanism. How was Elias getting paid without raising massive red flags on a global scale? No amount of obfuscation could hide a multi-billion-dollar inflow without triggering every international financial watch group. I turned to the original $100,000 anomaly. It wasn't just a confirmation. It was a test run for a sophisticated currency manipulation scheme. The money wasn't flowing in to Elias. It was cycling out in small, clean, heavily layered transactions, which were then being deposited into a series of highly diversified non-commercial assets, rare art, obscure historical bonds, and vast tracts of undeveloped international land. The sanctioned foreign entity was not paying Elias in traditional dollars. They were granting him access to a complex, hidden network of high liquidity, non-traceable assets that he could quietly monetize over decades. He was building a new empire untainted by the digital fingerprints of his treason. The $100,000 was the proof of concept for the asset transfer system. This discovery was both sickening and liberating. It meant that Elias's operation was not based on a single massive money drop, but on a vast, continuous stream of high-value assets. It confirmed the terrifying scale of the betrayal and the long-term planning involved. He wasn't planning a quick escape. He was planning a permanent, shielded transition of power and wealth, all while standing right in the center of the world stage. I realized that my initial fear of exposure was rapidly transitioning into a steely, focused resolve. The man who had vowed to spend his life with me was systematically dismantling the nation's technological advantage. This was no longer about personal revenge or a broken heart. This was about national security. And I, the unassuming forensic accountant, was the only person with the map to his entire operation. Elias returned from Zurich that Sunday, relaxed and radiating confidence. He looked at me across the dinner table, and for the first time I saw him not as my fiancé, but as a meticulously organized predator. His smile was flawless, his posture assured, the very picture of wealth and integrity. "You've been quiet, Anya," he noted, his gaze unnervingly sharp. "Did that Hong Kong client's project finally slow down?" I met his gaze, holding the professional mask in place, projecting a subtle fatigue and relief. "It's stabilized," I said smoothly. "The data bridge proved invaluable, darling. Thank you for letting me use your resources. It saved my client millions." He beamed, the casual arrogance returning. "Of course, my love. Anything for my anchor." He never imagined that while he was conducting treason in a foreign capital, his anchor had been deployed not to stabilize, but to map the weak points of his entire structure. I had the routine, the rhythm, and the identity of his human conduit. I knew my next move would be the most dangerous yet. I couldn't just continue gathering metadata. I needed to act. I needed to move from surveillance to physical infiltration, to place myself squarely in the crosshairs of his operation, because the one thing Elias would never let out of his sight was the core of his treason. The master ledger that contained the full roster of his conspirators and the unredacted details of his sales. And I knew exactly where he had to be hiding it. The terrifying rhythm of betrayal I had mapped out suddenly broke, shattering the thin veneer of safety I had constructed. The professional calm that had allowed me to function as Elias's covert analyst evaporated instantly, replaced by a visceral, icy fear. Elias was scheduled for another of his operational handoffs in 3 days. And my plan was to use that window to physically locate the master ledger, the irrefutable proof of his treason. But the predator I had underestimated moved first, leveraging his advantage of total knowledge to turn the digital net I was weaving into a lethal trap that was, in fact, designed for me all along. The turning point was subtle, originating from a completely unexpected source: the wedding planner. She called me, sounding apologetic and deeply concerned. "Anya, I just received a frantic call from the caterer. Elias suddenly canceled the contract, the entire Lake Como booking. He cited, quote, unforeseen urgent personal complications. He paid the penalty in full," which was astronomical, but offered no explanation. My hand holding the phone trembled. Canceling the wedding, the biggest, most public commitment of our lives, was not something Elias did lightly. It was his greatest asset, his symbol of legitimacy. If he was willing to sacrifice the illusion, it meant his operation was either critically exposed or, far worse, had reached its final, decisive phase. He was clearing the stage. And I, the inconvenient, brilliant fiancé, the last thing left to remove. I excused myself from the call with a forced composure, my mind racing through the thousands of data points I had collected. The cancellation meant he was preparing to disappear, or at least preparing to create a massive, distracting public spectacle. I sprinted to my secure location, the Faraday cage jewelry box, and powered up the satellite laptop, bypassing his home network entirely. I focused my analysis not on his financial flow, but on his digital assets and personal legal architecture. Specifically, I searched for changes to his power of attorney, his wills, and any recent communications with his personal offshore legal counsel. What I found was terrifyingly swift and surgical. Within the last 48 hours, Elias had executed 3 critical moves, each designed to wall off his treasonous fortune while simultaneously demolishing my life. First, he had transferred the majority of his non-chronos, liquid assets, the art, the bonds, the undeveloped land parcels. I had traced into an entirely new, sophisticated trust structure registered in a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty. The structure was named the Aegis. It was his ultimate escape hatch, a financial fortress designed to shield him from any future investigation. Second, he had subtly manipulated the ownership structure of Kronos Global itself, granting a controlling interest to a blind holding company linked to the Aegis, effectively making the company immune to seizure based on the actions of its former CEO. But it was the third discovery that made the air rush from my lungs. Buried in the metadata of his communication with his offshore legal team was a series of encrypted documents, prepared and finalized just 12 hours prior. I managed to decrypt the titles. They were official government-facing criminal complaints. The recipient, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The subject, money laundering, economic espionage, and theft of state secrets. And the sole defendant named on those documents was Anya Petrova. He hadn't chosen to simply kill me and make it look like an accident. That was too messy and carried too much risk of independent investigation. Instead, He had executed a preemptive character assassination and legal entrapment that leveraged his global credibility against my position as the lone, brilliant financial witness. He wasn't just attempting to silence me. He was planning to make me the scapegoat for the entire billion-dollar treasonous operation. The genius. And the horror of his move was its timing and structure. As his fiancé and a high-level forensic accountant with access to his private architecture, I was the only person in his life with the technical means and opportunity to execute the specific type of financial theft he was alleging. He had meticulously used every conversation, every piece of knowledge I had shared with him about financial weakness, to build a watertight case against me. He knew that I would eventually find the $100,000 anomaly and that I would begin to track his operation. He had likely used my own temporary data, bridged the one I had asked him to set up to plant forged digital evidence on my personal, professional servers. Evidence that would now show I was the one who initiated the Echo Point transactions and routed the treasonous data to the foreign entity. Not him. My use of his resources, which I thought was so clever, was actually the final piece of forensic framing he needed. I checked my primary work server remotely. It was exactly as I feared. Embedded deep within my client files were mirrored copies of Elias's most damning treasonous communications, but every digital breadcrumb led directly back to a temporary access key that only I had created and used. Elias hadn't needed to hack me. He had simply used the access I had legitimately requested to plant the poison. It was a perfect, self-fulfilling prophecy of guilt. The implications hit me like a physical wave. I was now a wanted criminal. The documents he had filed were designed to trigger an immediate federal investigation, an indictment, and an arrest warrant. He had effectively created a legal kill switch. Once the authorities moved in, they would find my digital footprint everywhere, my access keys, my data bridge requests, and the expertly forged evidence of the treasonous transfers. He would emerge as the heartbroken, betrayed CEO, the victim of his greedy, disloyal fiancé who had exploited his trust for billions. At less than 24 hours before the U.S. Attorney's Office would move to secure the indictment, freeze my assets, and issue a warrant for my arrest. The game was over, and I had lost the initial round catastrophically. The trap wasn't the marriage. The trap was the trust. The immediate instinct was to run, to vanish, to leverage my financial expertise to disappear into the global shadow economy. But that impulse was quickly overridden by the cold reality of my situation. Disappearing now would be the ultimate confirmation of my guilt. Every federal agency would hunt me with the belief that I was a high-level economic spy. Elias would have won instantly. I had to remain visible but untouchable. I had to use the one resource Elias hadn't accounted for: my unique, intimate knowledge of his future movements and the structure of the Aegis. The legal documents he filed detailed my supposed guilt. But they didn't. They couldn't account for the master ledger I knew he was hiding. That ledger was the only piece of evidence that contained the full roster of conspirators and the exact mechanism of the asset transfer that would link the Aegis back to Elias. Not me. My focus shifted from escaping the law to beating the clock. I had to gather the resources for my true defense before the legal hammer fell. First, I liquidated everything I could from my personal accounts that was not electronically linked to the federal system. I didn't take cash. That was far too traceable. I converted my liquid assets into physical, tangible wealth, specifically non-sequential. Rare gold coins that carried their value across any border and currency fluctuation. It was a move of pure old-school financial defense. Bypassing the digital net Elias had thrown over me. Second, I had to secure communication. I destroyed the satellite laptop and the air-gapped repeater. Every tool I had used to expose Elias was now a forensic link back to me. I acquired 3 disposable cell phones, each registered under a different fictional identity using carefully cultivated, untraceable prepaid services. These were for specific, limited communication only. My third and most critical move was to contact Marcus, the logistics manager I had identified as the human conduit for Elias's treason. Marcus was the weak link. He was an operative, but not a true believer. He was in it for the money, and he was terrified of being caught. Using one of the disposable phones, I sent Marcus a text message, short and brutally direct. The Aegis is moving. Your liability is now absolute. Your escape window closes in 24 hours, Anya. The message was designed not to recruit him, but to trigger his survival instinct. It used the code word for Elias's escape. Trust a word Marcus should never have known and provided a precise, terrifying timeline. I was not asking for help. I was planting the seed of panic. Marcus responded within an hour, his tone frantic. He didn't text back. He called the disposable line, his voice a tight whisper. Who is this? How do you know about that? You're exposing us. I am the person Elias is framing for your crimes, Marcus, I stated calmly, my voice low and authoritative. Your encryption key, the one you use for transport, is being revoked. Elias is cutting you out to protect his escape. You'll be the second defendant on the complaint after me. Do you really believe he left you enough money to fight the U.S. Attorney's Office for the next 20 years? Silence crackled over the line. I knew I had him. Fear, not loyalty, was the ultimate currency in this game. I need access to the transport log for the last 3 months, I demanded. The original physical log. No copies, no digital trail. Just the location of the next operational handoff. Your life depends on giving it to me. I can't, he stammered. It's locked in the secure Dropbox at the Kronos Auxiliary Office. Only Elias has the biometric key. Elias is flying to his operational hub tomorrow evening. He will be preoccupied. The key is biometric, but the system architecture is standard Kronos. There is a 2-minute window during the nightly server reboot, where the key defaults to a temporal override pin if the biometric fails. It's a fail-safe they use for maintenance. I paused, letting the implications sink in. Elias's arrogance had exposed his own maintenance protocol. The PIN will be the first 10 digits of the serial number of the laptop you used for your last operational exchange. I instructed. You have one chance. Get me that transport log or watch the FBI take you into custody by dawn the day after tomorrow. I hung up immediately, deleting the communication logs and crushing the burner phone under my heel. I had lit the fuse of his paranoia, giving him a terrifying choice. Cooperate with the architect of the conspiracy, or betray him to the only person who knew the path to freedom. The federal clock was ticking loudly in my mind. The indictment was imminent. I had to disappear from the penthouse, but my departure couldn't look like flight. It had to look like a calculated move by a guilty person attempting to destroy evidence. This would buy me precious time and reinforce Elias's narrative that I was panicked and culpable. I spent the next few hours crafting the perfect digital footprint of a guilty escapee. I logged on to the federal financial reporting systems using an open source, easily traceable VPN, and I made multiple small, panicked attempts to access my frozen accounts. I left open on my personal laptop a document that appeared to be a draft of a confession, filled with technical jargon and frantic self-justification. It was a digital scream designed to be found and misinterpreted. Then I gathered my necessities, the gold coins, a stack of blank, new prepaid credit cards, and a pre-packed bag containing only neutral, untraceable clothing. I changed my appearance drastically, cutting and dyeing my hair in the privacy of my bathroom, applying theatrical makeup to alter the contours of my face. The forensic accountant was transforming into a ghost as the sun began to set. Casting long, accusing shadows across the elegant marble floors, I walked out of the penthouse. I didn't leave a note. I simply left the door slightly ajar, creating the subtle impression of sudden, unplanned flight. I hailed a standard yellow taxi, avoiding any car service that could be digitally tracked to the residence. My destination, a nondescript short-term rental apartment I had secretly acquired years ago, a quiet, neutral zone intended as a safe house for high-stakes professional clients. Now it was my sanctuary. The moment I stepped onto the street, I ceased to be Anya Petrova. the accomplished forensic expert and fiancé to a titan. I became a fugitive, a woman running from a crime she didn't commit but for which she was now the sole suspect. Elias had locked me out of my life and trapped me in his conspiracy. The next morning, the news hit the wire like a bomb. Elias Thorne, the beloved CEO, issued a tearful public statement expressing his shock and deep heartbreak. He announced that his own beloved fiancée, Anya Petrova, was the subject of a massive federal investigation, having allegedly used her unique financial expertise and her privileged access to his systems to execute one of the largest economic espionage plots in modern history. The narrative was flawless. Elias was positioned as the tragic hero whose trust had been brutally violated. My image, my face now slightly different, was plastered across every screen, identified as the master criminal on the run. My former colleagues and friends spoke of their shock and disbelief, subtly reinforcing the idea that only a person of my caliber could have pulled off such a sophisticated betrayal. But amidst the clamor of the media frenzy, there was a single, silent confirmation that my plan had worked. Marcus, the logistics man, had delivered a text message, sent from a new burner phone I didn't recognize, pinged on my last functioning disposable device. It contained only a long encrypted string of coordinates, arrival times, and a single critical code word: the black box. Marcus hadn't just given me the next meeting location. He had given me the name of the final operational objective. The black box was clearly the master ledger, the physical or digital container for the full roster of the treasonous network. Marcus had chosen his loyalty, and it was to survival. I was now a wanted criminal. My face on every newsfeed, framed for billions. But I held the map to Elias's entire escape plan and a desperate, terrified operative as a potential ally. Elias had locked me out of my life, but in doing so, it forced me into the shadows where I could operate with the total ruthlessness of a person with nothing left to lose. My goal was no longer merely to clear my name. It was to dismantle the entire conspiracy from the inside out and watch Elias Thorne's gilded prison collapse around him. The confrontation was bypassed, but the war had just escalated from a cold digital feud to a desperate physical hunt for the truth. The coordinates Marcus provided were a knife edge of irony: a private, heavily secured industrial complex in Nevada, a sprawling, anonymous structure used primarily for hosting high-level corporate data servers. The perfect place to conceal a treasonous operation. The coordinates confirmed that Elias's operational handoff was now a large-scale, physical transfer of highly sensitive data. The window of opportunity to find the black box, the master ledger, was narrow, confined to the brief moments during the transfer when his security protocols would be partially compromised. But the distance was vast. The risk of interception by federal authorities was absolute. And the cost of failure was 20 years in a federal penitentiary for crimes I did not commit. I was a ghost now, hunted by the very legal systems I had once helped maintain. My life as Anya Petrova was over. The media narrative had been perfectly cemented. I was the rogue financial mastermind. Every move I made to clear my name would, from the outside, look like the desperate actions of a guilty fugitive. I realized that fighting the law head-on was impossible. The evidence Elias had planted was too convincing, my access too damning. I would be arrested before I could even utter the word treason. But a different, more terrifying idea began to form in the chilling solitude of my safe house. It was an idea so audacious, so contrary to every instinct of self-preservation, that it briefly made me question my sanity. If I couldn't run from the legal trap, I had to run directly into Elias's operational orbit, not as a threat, but as his most valuable and desperately needed asset. Elias had framed me for the entire billion-dollar scheme. He had assumed I would disappear, leaving him to claim victory and manage the flow of the illicit assets into the Aegis Trust. But the very complexity of the Aegis was his greatest vulnerability. That trust was designed by me, conceptually, during casual discussions about high-level financial defense. Elias was brilliant, But he was a technologist and a strategic planner, not a forensic accountant. He could build the structure, but he could not manage the inevitable fiscal fallout from transferring such massive non-monetary wealth across global jurisdictions. The moment the treason complaint hit the news, two things would happen. First, all traditional banking institutions would flag and freeze every Chronos subsidiary connected to the foreign entity. Second, and more critically for Elias, the Aegis Trust would begin to suffer from transfer rigidity. Moving the art, the bonds, and the land parcels into liquid funds required constant, high-level financial maneuvering, leveraging, and cycling the funds through legal marketplaces without triggering global alarms. Elias had just lost his only qualified person for that job. Me, his internal finance team could handle routine matters, but they did not have the forensic sophistication to manage the fallout of a scandal of this magnitude. He was alone, wealthy, and critically handicapped by his own brilliance. He needed an expert who understood the architecture of the crime, the weak points of the Aegis, and the legal maneuvers necessary to keep the money flowing. He needed Anya Petrova. The decision was not about vengeance. It was about survival and opportunity. Going to prison meant a death sentence for the truth. Becoming his asset meant I would be granted total, supervised access to the inner workings of his treason. The only way to get close enough to find the black box and expose the entire network. I had to convince him that my expertise was worth more to him alive and controlled than dead and silenced. The risk was unimaginable. If I approached him, I would be walking into the lion's den, placing myself under the direct, constant surveillance of a man who believed I was a criminal and who had already attempted to destroy me. I would be staking my life on his singular, predictable weakness, his arrogance, and his need for control. He would not risk letting billions of dollars freeze up just to satisfy a vendetta against his ex-fiancé. He would choose the money. My strategy was simple. I wouldn't beg for a job. I would sell him my indispensability. I used the one piece of leverage, had that Elias couldn't ignore: the Marcus intelligence. Marcus was his logistical man, a known operative in a sensitive location. If Elias suspected I had contact with Marcus, he would instantly realize that his operation was deeply compromised. I selected the time carefully, late evening, during Elias's typical solitary strategy session in his shielded home office. I knew the security was absolute, but the external communications were still vulnerable to my deep cover network. I used a high-level disposable satellite phone with advanced voice modulation software, masking my location and my natural voice pattern. I placed the call to Elias's private, encrypted office line, a number I knew only a handful of people had. The call connected almost instantly. His voice, usually smooth and controlled, was tight with suspicion. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "The same way I got the coordinates for the Nevada site, Elias," I replied, modulating my voice to sound cool, professional, and slightly detached. "You can call me Anya. Or you can call me the person who knows where your logistics manager, Marcus, is currently headed and what specific codes he's carrying." The line went silent, a void where his usual arrogant composure resided. I knew the name Marcus, paired with the implied knowledge of the Nevada operation, had hit him with the force of a tactical strike. He wasn't dealing with a panicked fugitive. He was dealing with a deeply informed adversary. "You're making a mistake, Anya," he finally hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "The federal authorities have a warrant for your arrest. They know you stole from me. You are a fugitive. Your leverage is zero." "My leverage is not zero, Elias. It is absolute," I countered, my voice steady, projecting an authority I barely felt. "You have $1 billion in assets stalled in the Aegis Trust structure right now. You have been cut off from traditional liquidity due to your own publicized scandal. Your internal team is smart, but they are not forensic architects. They cannot manage the transfer rigidity that is about to lock down your entire escape fund." I deployed the crucial, highly specific terminology only an expert would know. You need to leverage the historical bond portfolio and cycle the rare art assets through the Hong Kong auction market within the next 48 hours to avoid a 60% valuation drop. Can your corporate lawyers do that without triggering a red flag? I designed the rigidity protocols of the Aegis. Only I know how to bypass them without leaving a trace that leads directly to you. And what about the federal warrant? You think I'm going to risk sheltering a known fugitive? He demanded, his voice trembling now with a mixture of rage and burgeoning desperation. You won't be sheltering a fugitive, Elias. You will be hiring an untraceable, highly incentivized consultant, I explained, laying out the chilling terms of my proposal. You will not clear my name. You will let the federal warrant stand. I will remain Anya Petrova, the fugitive. But I will be your asset, your financial ghost. I will manage the liquidity of the Aegis remotely, from a secure location of your choosing. I clear your money. And in exchange, you keep me alive outside of prison. And you pay me a fixed fee to ensure my loyalty remains with your bank balance, not with the authorities. The silence returned longer this time. I could hear his mind working, the analytical genius calculating the risks versus the rewards. The risk of keeping me alive was massive. But the risk of losing his billion-dollar escape fund was absolute financial ruin. A loss his ego could never withstand. He would prioritize the fortune over the revenge. You are insane, he finally whispered, the fear in his voice barely concealed by his loathing. I am a financial realist, Elias. I corrected him. You needed me to build your escape, and now you desperately need me to operate it. You have two choices. Watch the transfer rigidity protocols lock down your entire future, or utilize the person who created the problem to solve it. I don't want your affection. I want my freedom and guaranteed protection from the legal trap you set for me. Hire me, or watch your world burn with my expertise. He finally capitulated, the sound of his defeat a soft, bitter sigh over the encrypted line. You are an impossible woman, Anya. But you are right. The money is paramount. What do you require? The victory felt hollow, a temporary reprieve purchased at the cost of my soul. I gave him the conditions, an immediate, non-negotiable transfer of $5 million into a newly created non-traceable digital wallet as a good faith retainer, complete unfettered remote access to all Aegis financial data, and, most importantly, unconditional security guaranteed by his top non-Chronos security personnel. He agreed to the terms, his voice stiff with humiliation. Be ready. I will contact you tomorrow with the details of your extraction. But understand this, Anya. If you attempt one single act of betrayal, if you leave one single trace of contact with any external entity, my security team will silence you before you can even dial the number. You are my asset now. You belong to me. I understand, Elias, I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips. I am your asset. And now I am going to save your life savings. I hung up, the victory feeling less like empowerment and more like a heavy suit of armor I was forced to wear. I had successfully sold myself back into the hands of the man who framed me for treason. I was trading a guaranteed prison sentence for a highly probable execution. But I had purchased the one thing I needed: proximity to the truth. I was now one step closer to the black box. The deal was struck in the cold, dead hours before dawn. The moment the $5 million retainer hit the digital wallet, I had designated a token of Elias's desperate Kononos in my life as a fugitive ended, and my existence as his asset began. This was not freedom. It was merely a change of cage, where the warden was the man who had ordered my destruction. My new reality was one of perpetual surveillance, where every breath I took, every line of code I wrote, and every financial calculation I executed was scrutinized by the man who held the key to my arrest and my demise. I had earned the title of Trojan Horse, carrying the means of his downfall deep within the protective walls of his operation. My extraction was a meticulously planned operation that confirmed the frightening extent of Elias's reach. 2 hours after the retainer transfer, a large matte black transport vehicle with heavily tinted ballistic glass arrived at the curb of my safe house. Out stepped two men who did not belong to Kronos Global's corporate security, but to an opaque, highly specialized private militia used for protecting heads of state and illicit wealth. They were silent, efficient, and possessed an unsettling surgical detachment. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with eyes that constantly scanned the perimeter, introduced himself only as Rhino. Rhino's first instruction was absolute: surrender all personal devices, including the last disposable phone. I complied instantly, understanding that my digital connection to the outside world was now severed, ensuring I could not betray Elias, but also guaranteeing my total isolation. Before I stepped into the vehicle, Rhino placed a small silver tracking device on the inside of my wrist, beneath the cuff of my jacket. Non-removable without triggering a silent alert. "Anya," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's linked to Elias's private network. It's for your protection." Of course, I knew the truth. It was a digital leash and, most likely, a dead man's switch. The journey was a blur of secure transportation, passing through multiple covert checkpoints. My destination was a vast, sprawling estate located deep in the Caribbean, a private island that functioned less as a retreat and more as a sovereign data sanctuary. It was here, surrounded by sun and sea, that Elias had relocated his nerve center after the media explosion in New York. The irony was exquisite. I was wanted by the U.S. government for stealing billions, and I was now living under the protection of the man who had committed the crime, isolated on an island paid for by his treason. Our first encounter on the island was clinical. Elias met me in a secure operations room, walls lined with monitors displaying complex data flows. He was dressed in linen, radiating the relaxed confidence of a man who had successfully navigated a major crisis. There were no emotional accusations, no mention of the canceled wedding, and no hint of the previous night's desperate phone call. He treated me with the cold, measured respect he would afford a highly valuable, highly dangerous piece of equipment. "Anya," he said simply, gesturing toward a desk set up with multiple high-end terminals. "Welcome to the real Kronos Global. Your sole function is the immediate and complete management of the Aegis's transfer rigidity. I need the liquidity flowing within 2 weeks. Do that, and you remain safe. Fail or attempt any deviation from that task, and your fate will be immediate and non-negotiable." The desk he provided was state-of-the-art, but completely air-gapped from the island's primary communications network. I had the tools to manage the money, but no way to contact the outside world. My work was conducted in a digital bubble, ensuring that any evidence I gathered would be contained within Elias's own ecosystem. This was the fundamental constraint of my new existence. I had access to his criminal ledger, but no secure channel to extract the data. My days became a suffocating rhythm of intense financial analysis, conducted under the watchful eyes of Rhino and his team, and the constant, chilling presence of Elias himself. I began working instantly, meticulously creating a series of legalistic maneuvers to begin the quiet monetization of the assets in the Aegis. I found myself performing some of the most complex, high-stakes forensic accounting of my entire career, but not for justice for a criminal. I was actively participating in the cleanup of a billion-dollar treason. The sheer volume of the fraud was breathtaking. Elias hadn't just sold blueprints. He had established a complete parallel financial infrastructure, involving deep cover banks in Dubai, shell companies registered to elderly citizens in Liechtenstein, and a sprawling network of asset managers across Asia. My task was to make this infrastructure appear legitimate, to create a financial history for the assets that predated the scandal, making the sudden influx of wealth seem like the culmination of decades of shrewd, legal investing. The challenge was in the details. Every single ledger entry I created had to be flawless, able to withstand forensic scrutiny from international investigators. I was, in effect, forging a billion-dollar legal reality. I worked with total dedication, knowing that if I made a single mistake, A single amateur error, Elias would instantly recognize it as a deliberate act of sabotage and I would be removed. Survival demanded perfection. This performance was the heart of my cover. I had to sell Elias the narrative that I was a greedy professional first and a betrayed woman second. I maintained a cool, demanding, professional demeanor, arguing with him not about morality, but about the technical risks of his asset choices. The Malaysian land parcels are too rigid right now, Elias, I would state, pointing to a data screen. We need to cycle the high-end artwork through Geneva first. The tax laws are more favorable for immediate liquidity. You have to prioritize the money, not the asset's aesthetic value. Elias respected the logic. He respected the ruthless focus on his profit. He began to trust my competence again, confusing my professional dedication to solving the problem with personal loyalty to him. He even started sharing slightly more privileged information, often pausing during a discussion to remark, "See, Anya, this is why I needed you." They couldn't do this. He was feeding his own hubris, convinced he had tamed the one woman who could destroy him. But my compliance was a calculated veneer. Every line of code I wrote for Elias was also a secret piece of reconnaissance for myself. I was searching for the black box, the master ledger I knew had to be on the island. Elias wouldn't trust a document of that magnitude to a remote server, however secure. It had to be physical, or at least physically stored. I began my hunt by analyzing the network architecture of the island itself. The entire estate was controlled by a centralized server core, managing security, communication, and environmental controls. During my routine management of the Aegis's digital assets, I was able to subtly deploy a low-level diagnostic sweep of the core server's physical peripherals. The results were tantalizing. The core server logged a single, sustained encrypted auxiliary connection that was completely unaccounted for in the estate's floor plans. It was a digital phantom. This auxiliary connection, I deduced, was the secure link to the black box. It wasn't accessed often, only once every few days. Typically between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. The connection was terminated instantly after a brief, rapid data exchange. It was clear Elias was performing a quick, encrypted check or update of the master ledger. The physical location of the phantom connection became my obsession. The architectural plans provided to me ostensibly for planning secure data backups were subtly manipulated. They showed the entire estate, but there was a significant, structurally inconsistent void in the plans. An entire wing that was simply marked utilities and storage. This was where the phantom link terminated. I needed to access that wing. Rhino and his team maintained a constant, almost invisible perimeter. Around the operational areas, and Elias's office suite was monitored by internal thermal and motion sensors. Any unauthorized movement, particularly during the deep night hours, would be instantly flagged. My strategy had to leverage Elias's routine, not challenge it. I noticed a consistent small flaw in Elias's personal security. His nightly ritual. Every night, precisely at 11:30 p.m. he would go to the estate's private ocean-facing balcony to smoke a rare Cuban cigar and make a secure 15-minute call to his legal counsel. For those 15 minutes, his primary attention was external, focused on the horizon. And his movement sensors were momentarily ignored. The biggest constraint was the physical access control. The utility wing was secured by an advanced multi-factor biometric lock, requiring a fingerprint scan, a retinal scan, and a rolling daily security code. It was impenetrable, but I had the logistics man, Marcus, in my back pocket. I needed information on the lock's maintenance protocol. During a routine, heavily supervised call to my old professional network, ostensibly about a legal loophole for the Aegis, I used a predetermined, coded phrase to pass a single request to my contact. What is the standard maintenance override sequence for Kronos's high-security biometric locks, specifically the B90 model? The response came back 24 hours later, subtly integrated into the body of a legal brief that Elias himself reviewed and dismissed as boilerplate. Buried within a discussion of property rights was a sequence of technical jargon that, To a forensic expert detailed the flaw. The B90 model required a daily manual reset sequence applied to its external power cell to prevent electromagnetic interference from compromising the lock. This sequence was performed every morning at 4 a.m. by a single low-level technician. This was the window, the critical vulnerability I needed. The technician was low-level, unmonitored, and predictable, but I couldn't approach the technician. That would instantly compromise my cover. I needed to access the utility wing before the technician's reset during the deep night, when the lock system was at its most vulnerable. The key lay in the fact that the lock wasn't truly offline during the technician's manual reset. It was merely cycling its protocols. I needed to replicate that exact electromagnetic signature to trigger the manual reset sequence. Without physical access to the locks, external power cell. This was where my background in forensic hardware manipulation, a skill I had once considered obsolete, became essential. I realized I could use the estate's central power grid, which I had mapped for my Aegis, work as a giant antenna. The main environmental controls, located in a less secure staff wing, were my target. By creating a microsurge in the power grid at a specific frequency and duration, I could replicate the electromagnetic signature of the B90's manual reset. The plan was incredibly risky. A power surge, even a small one, could alert the entire security team and trigger the island's emergency protocols. I had to time the surge perfectly during Elias's 15-minute cigar ritual, ensuring that his attention was elsewhere, and ensuring that the surge would be localized enough to only affect the lock and not the entire estate. The night of the planned infiltration was clear. The Caribbean air heavy and still. Elias retired to his balcony precisely at 11:30 p.m. I waited until the faint red glow of his Cuban cigar was visible through the office window, my signal. I moved silently to the staff wing. Entering the environmental control room, my heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a potential alarm. The room was simple, dominated by a large control panel for the island's HVAC and power regulation. I had previously introduced a small, sophisticated piece of code into the system's regulator code that was dormant until I manually activated it with trembling hands. I activated the code. For a terrifying 3 seconds, the lights in the control room flickered violently, accompanied by a low, almost subsonic hum. The power surged. Then, just as suddenly, it stabilized. I rushed back to my terminal, pretending to be reviewing a complex asset transfer. I watched the security monitor displaying the main operational area. Nothing. The surge was brief enough to be dismissed as a minor grid fluctuation, a common occurrence on a remote island. But my true target was the B90 lock on the utility wing. I checked my auxiliary network scanner. The lock status had momentarily switched from biometric to temporal override active. The window was open. I immediately accessed the island's primary surveillance feed. The camera focused on the utility wing was momentarily blinded by the light fluctuation, creating a brief 30-second gap in the recording before the backup power adjusted. I had to move. I slipped out of the operations room, moving with the trained silence of a predator. I used the shadows, hugging the walls, my senses screaming with the danger of the invisible security network. I reached the utility wing door. The door was still locked, but the digital status screen confirmed the temporal override was active. I tried the PIN, the 10 digits from Marcus's laptop serial number. The lock chimed softly. Access granted. I slipped inside the utility wing, heart pounding, the cold air of the unmonitored space washing over me. This was the dark, unmapped heart of Elias's empire. The black box had to be here. My 48 hours of freedom were over, and I was now exactly where Elias wanted Midoriya's control. But I had my access, and I had my target. The dangerous game of the Trojan horse had just begun. The utility wing was not a cluttered storage unit, but a subterranean vaulta, highly customized, pressurized environment that housed the true technological heart of Elias's operation. Rows of humming, specialized servers lined the walls. each one dedicated not to Chronos Global, but to the Aegis and the treasonous transfers. The air was cold, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive electronics. This was the place where the economic secrets were born and stored. And I had only minutes before the magnetic lock would cycle back to its impenetrable biometric state. My eyes scanned the room with professional urgency. The black box, the master ledger, was not a physical book. It was a secure data repository. It had to be either an external hard drive tethered to a specific server or a standalone high-capacity quantum storage unit. I located the most heavily shielded rack of servers, identifiable by the distinctive blue light of the Excalibur system integration I had traced weeks ago. There, connected to the back of the central Excalibur processor, was a small titanium-cased drive, no larger than a deck of cards. It was locked into the server using a proprietary digital key. But its non-networked connection confirmed it was the physical repository for the most sensitive data. This was the black box. I immediately recognized the flaw in its design. Elias, obsessed with quantum encryption, had focused all his security efforts on data transmission, neglecting the simpler protocols for data access. He believed that because the drive was non-networked and physically tethered, it was untouchable. He was wrong. The key wasn't physical, but digital, a customized access protocol built into the drive's firmware. I knew I couldn't simply unplug the drive. That would trigger an immediate high-priority shutdown sequence that would alert Rhino and lock me into the vault. I also couldn't copy the entire drive. The data volume was too vast, and the encryption would take days to breach. I needed to extract the specific forensic blueprint of the master ledger and nothing else. My only tool was my professional access terminal back in the operations room, where I was supposed to be managing the Aegis. I had to create a controlled remote breach using Elias's own assets, and I had to do it without leaving a single trace on the black box itself. I quickly performed a deep-level diagnostics check on the tethered drive. The security was built around a sophisticated zero-access protocol. The drive literally could not be read unless it recognized the encrypted signature of Elias's personal operations terminal. My first task was to replicate that signature back in the operations room. Under the guise of an all-night push to liquidate the Malaysian land parcels, I began building my digital weapon. The process was agonizingly slow, requiring me to leverage the complex, high-level administrative functions of the Aegis financial management system. I used the money management software as a covert compiler, forcing it to generate a specific set of encrypted packets that mimicked Elias's security signature. It took me 48 consecutive hours, fueled by caffeine and pure adrenaline, to build the digital key. I had to work in short bursts, constantly checking the timing of Rhino's perimeter patrol and responding flawlessly to Elias's intermittent demands for financial updates. I was a study in controlled deception. One moment I was arguing passionately about bond yields. The next, I was compiling a criminal access key beneath the visible data layer. The critical phase began when the key was ready. I couldn't transmit it over the island's Wi-Fi. I needed a non-networked communication method. My solution was chillingly elegant. I used the island's emergency power grid. The entire estate utilized a specialized fiber optic power cable that ran directly from the central utility vault to the main operations room. This cable carried electricity, but I knew its internal shielding was vulnerable to high-frequency data induction. I built a small, imperceptible coil out of copper wire salvaged from a discarded power adapter, taping it inside the casing of my work terminal's power supply. When activated, this coil would generate a specific microburst of electromagnetic energy capable of transmitting a simple data payload down the fiber optic power line. The payload was my replicated access key. The receiver was the black box drive itself, which I had secretly programmed during my initial vault access to listen for that specific non-electrical frequency. I waited until the early morning, the 1 hour when Elias was usually in a deep, medically induced sleep and Rhino's security shift change was at its most lax. At 3:45 a.m., I activated the coil. There was no noise, no visible flicker, only a faint, almost musical hum from the power supply of my terminal. For 3 seconds, my digital key flew silently down the power line, bypassing all network security, and landing directly in the firmware of the black box. The confirmation was instant and terrifying. The black box recognized the replicated key as Elias's terminal. The zero access protocol unlocked. The drive was now readable remotely, for a period of exactly 15 minutes before the protocol automatically cycled its encryption and blocked all further access. I did not attempt to download the entire contents. That was a fool's errand. I executed the core mission. I ran a forensic search query designed to isolate the master ledger's essential components. My search terms were simple but surgically precise. Non-sequential asset transfer, third-party sanctioned entity communication logs, and Aegis Trust beneficiary roster. The drive responded instantly, sending back compressed data packets through the same electromagnetic induction method, transferring the entire blueprint of his treason, hidden within the electrical power pulsing into my terminal. The data arrived as a massive encrypted spreadsheet. It was a financial blueprint of staggering complexity, detailing every asset transfer, every shell company used, and most critically, the full unredacted list of co-conspirators. The names and organizations listed were not just the foreign entity I had traced, but also high-level government officials, members of Congress, and international banking executives, a network of corruption that stretched from the halls of power in Washington to the back alleys of global finance. This spreadsheet was the master ledger. It was the truth, unvarnished and absolute. But the most damning revelation lay in the internal communication logs attached to the spreadsheet. They were detailed, time-stamped messages between Elias and his highest-level conspirators. And in one particular exchange, Elias confirmed his exact motives and his contempt for me. The entry was dated 2 days before the wedding cancellation. A conspirator asked if the asset, meaning me, Anya, was securely neutralized. Elias's reply was chillingly clear. Petrova has been surgically neutralized. She served her purpose perfectly by creating the financial defenses. Now she's the perfect scapegoat. Her ego blinded her to the fact that I needed her to build the prison, not escape it. The indictment ensures she will never testify against the Aegis. Reading those words, witnessing the cold, calculated cruelty of his design, was more painful than the betrayal itself. I was never a partner. I was a professional tool, designed for a single, specific task and then discarded. The initial quiet fury I had felt was replaced by a singular, focused determination. I was his tool, but now I would be the weapon of his destruction. I had the master ledger, the forensic blueprint to dismantle his empire. But it was contained within my isolated terminal, still trapped within Elias's controlled ecosystem. I couldn't transmit it. The moment I attempted an external connection, the tracking device on my wrist would trigger and I would be silenced. I spent the next 48 hours not resting, but re-encrypting the ledger using a military-grade key that only I possessed, and meticulously seeding the data across the island's most secure financial servers that Elias accessed daily for the Aegis. I didn't hide the ledger. I buried it in plain sight, fragmented across dozens of different high-priority financial reports, disguised as legitimate asset allocation data. It was the ultimate Trojan horse. The evidence of his ruin was now the very code of his empire. The critical challenge was the physical extraction. I needed a portable, external storage medium, but Rhino's team conducted random, intrusive searches of my person and my room, ensuring I carried no unauthorized electronics. A flash drive was impossible. The solution came from an unlikely source. The island's emergency satellite phone, a rugged, military-grade communication device kept in Elias's locked office for catastrophic weather events. I had access to the office, but the phone itself was secured behind a complex numeric lock. I had previously identified a common maintenance flaw in that particular phone model. If the battery was deliberately depleted and then rapidly recharged, the device's temporary memory buffer would briefly spill its most recent access code into the system log. The log, however, was only accessible via a specialized, custom-built diagnostic tool. The diagnostic tool was precisely what I planned to build. My materials were rudimentary: a repurposed power regulator from a defunct server rack, a copper filament, and a small magnetic resistor taken from a broken kitchen appliance. Over 2 nights, working with agonizing slowness inside the utility vault, I crafted a bespoke diagnostic key. It was small enough to be concealed within the sole of my shoe. My goal was to briefly deplete the satellite phone's battery during a storm, wait for the recharge cycle, and then use my custom key to pull the access code from the memory spill, the key to the master ledger's physical extraction. I had the ledger, I had the encryption key, and now I had the mechanism of escape. All I needed was the perfect storm and the final, reckless opportunity to put my entire life on the line. The invisible web of security that surrounded me was tightening, making my movements within Elias's fortress increasingly perilous. I had successfully placed the master ledger fragmented and encrypted to the deep financial servers I managed. But the physical reality of my imprisonment remained absolute. I was a professional asset, but also a prisoner of war. And my jailer was not Elias, but the man whose eyes never left me, Rhino, the chief of his security detail. Rhino was a silent, monolithic presence. He did not speak in threats. His authority was conveyed through the precision of his surveillance. Every time I looked up from my terminal, I found him, or one of his subordinates, positioned at the threshold of the operations room, their posture signaling unwavering vigilance. Elias trusted Rhino's clinical ruthlessness, knowing he valued the security of the operation and its multi-million-dollar paycheck far above any loyalty to a person, including Elias himself. Rhino was the ultimate professional mercenary, and I was his most high-value and potentially most volatile piece of cargo. I knew that my digital subterfuge, the electromagnetic data siphon, and the logic bomb planted in the power grid could only hold up for so long. Rhino's team was forensic in their own right. They tracked heat signatures, atmospheric disturbances, and minute variances in the island's power consumption. They were looking for the flaw, and sooner or later, it would trace the tiny power fluctuation back to the environmental control room, and then to me. I had to assume the clock on my exposure was running critically low. My only hope lay not in evading Rhino's gaze, but in leveraging his professional principles. I had to prove to him, without speaking a single incriminating word, that the greatest security threat to the entire operation was not the fugitive he was guarding, but the arrogance of the man who hired him. My opportunity arose during a mandatory security audit. Rhino initiated a full-spectrum review of the entire island's network architecture, including the very financial servers I was manipulating. He stood over my shoulder for hours, his presence heavy and intrusive, watching every keystroke as I navigated the Aegis's complex structure. I performed flawlessly, making the money flow, proving my value. But during a break in the audit, I subtly introduced a deliberate professional challenge. I opened a diagnostics window on my screen and paused, letting my gaze drift to a specific server log that was technically unrelated to the Aegis, but critically important to the island's external communication. This log showed a small, almost negligible data spiller, fragmented IP packet attempting to leave the island's shielded perimeter. Rhino's eyes, trained to spot anomalies, immediately locked onto the flicker on the screen. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice low and guttural. "A remnant," I replied, my voice neutral and dismissive. "A routine latency packet from the external communication tower. It's noise. Nothing important to the Aegis liquidity. Run a full trace on it," he ordered, ignoring my dismissal. He wasn't interested in the money. He was interested in the threat. I ran the trace as ordered, and the result was instant. The packet originated from Elias's private study, specifically from a terminal he used for personal entertainment, a terminal that was supposed to be completely unmonitored and disconnected from the main operational network. The packet was attempting to send a heavily encrypted burst of data to a financial newswire service in Singapore. "That terminal is shielded," Rhino stated, his brow furrowing with genuine professional anger. "It shouldn't be communicating with the outside at all, much less trying to transmit data." I maintained my neutral posture, leaning back slightly from the screen. Elias insisted on installing his own specialized feed for market news. He said he needed to maintain his public image as the visionary CEO. He bypassed your security protocols to do it. It's a breach, Rhino, but it's his breach. I had given Rhino the perfect opportunity to see the truth. That Elias's vanity and his desire to control his public narrative were creating unforgivable, high-level security flaws that compromised the safety of the entire treasonous operation. Rhino's loyalty was to the mission, and Elias's ego was fundamentally jeopardizing the mission. Rhino stared at the screen, the conflict visible in the tightening of his jaw. He was a man trained to eliminate external threats. But the greatest threat was internal, originating from the very person who signed his checks. He didn't speak another word, but the shared moment of cold professional realization that Elias Thorne was a security risk created an invisible, unspoken bond between us. I had appealed not to his conscience, but to his professional code. From that day forward, Rhino's surveillance of me changed subtly. He still watched me, but his gaze was no longer purely accusatory. It was analytical, observing my movements, looking for flaws in Elias's plan, not mine. He recognized that I was the only person in the compound operating with a cold, clear dedication to the financial mission. While Elias was distracted by his public image and his obsession with revenge, the opportunity to fully enlist, at least neutralize him came during the next phase of my plan, building the bespoke diagnostic key for the emergency satellite phone. I needed uninterrupted access to the utility vault again. And Rhino's patrol patterns made it impossible without his tacit approval. I chose my moment carefully. I created a fake, high-priority emergency alert in the Aegis's internal ledger, calculated, non-lethal virus that would temporarily freeze the liquidity transfer, making it appear as if the structure itself was failing. The alert was designed to look like a malicious attack from a competing entity, targeting a specific flaw in Elias's own corporate firewalls. Elias reacted with predictable panic. "Fix it, Anya. Now, if that money freezes, the whole thing collapses," he roared, his polished composure dissolving instantly into fear. "I need to physically access the central firewalls in the utility vault." "Elias," I stated calmly, projecting the focused authority of an expert in crisis. "It's a hardware-level exploit. I need to run a manual diagnostic override, and I need to do it without surveillance. Any interference, any delay, and we lose billions." Elias hesitated, his fear battling his paranoia. "Rhino, go with her. Watch her every move. If she touches anything outside the firewall hardware, neutralize her immediately." Rhino looked at Elias, then at me. I met his gaze, my expression conveying a challenge that transcended our roles. "You know, this is necessary to save the money. Do you trust my ability to fix his mistake, or do you trust his emotional panic?" Rhino made his choice. "The utility vault is already locked down, sir. The intrusion is purely digital. I need to assess the physical perimeter, but Anya needs uninterrupted access to the terminals. I will monitor her from the exterior surveillance feed, not the interior. If she attempts to leave the vault, she is neutralized." It was a brilliant compromise. Rhino had secured the money while simultaneously giving me the single resource. I needed unmonitored access to the vault's internal sensors. He had recognized that the financial asset, the money I was saving, was the priority, and my competence was essential to preserving it. Inside the vault, the pressure was immense. I knew Rhino was watching the exterior feed, monitoring the door, but the interior was blind. I didn't waste a second on the fake emergency. I solved the digital virus in 90 seconds. It was my own code. After all, then, I turned my attention to the real mission, building the bespoke diagnostic key for the emergency satellite phone. I quickly accessed the necessary components I had hidden within the vault during my first infiltration: the copper filament, the regulator, the magnetic resistor. I worked with the rapid, silent efficiency of a surgeon, assembling the small, specialized hardware tool designed to extract the numeric access code from the phone's memory spill. Every second that passed was an extension of Rhino's trust, and a compounding of my risk. The final piece of the key was a tiny, custom-written piece of CODA memory siphoning script that I had to inject into the vault's core network from my terminal. This script was designed to remain dormant until the satellite phone was brought into the room, creating an undetectable, one-time data handshake. I completed the injection and concealed the small physical diagnostic tool inside the lining of my jacket, exactly where Rhino's perimeter searches were thorough but never intrusive. Enough to check. I emerged from the vault after 2 hours, my face pale but radiating the professional calm of a crisis averted. "It is stabilized," Elias, I reported, handing him a complex, densely technical report detailing the intrusion. "It was a sophisticated attack targeting a flaw in your legacy firewall protocols. You need to authorize an immediate upgrade, or the Aegis will be exposed." Elias, sweating and visibly shaken by the near loss of his fortune, nodded frantically. "Do it, Anya. Whatever it takes. Rhino, ensure the protocols are followed precisely." Rhino looked at me, a flicker of something that resembled respect in his eyes. He knew I had saved the operation from Elias's own negligence. I had solidified my position as the indispensable asset, the only person capable of holding the fragile empire together. But the most critical part of the plan was yet to come. I had the mechanism, the diagnostic key, but I didn't have the opportunity. I needed the perfect storm of physical event that would force Elias to bring the emergency satellite phone and the key to my escape directly into my operational sphere. I needed an active nature to provide the cover for my final, reckless gamble. My alliance with Rhino was silent, transactional, and tenuous. He was not my friend, but my guarantor. He would keep me alive as long as I preserved the money. But the moment I initiated the final move, the moment I used the diagnostic key to access the master ledger, I would instantly transition from indispensable asset to immediate threat. And I knew Rhino, the ultimate professional, would not hesitate to eliminate the threat before I could even make the first call. My existence on that fortress island had distilled into a single, terrifying truth. I was a weapon loaded and aimed at the man who held the safety catch. I had the master ledger fragmented and hidden. I had the specialized diagnostic key to breach the emergency satellite phone. And I had neutralized the security chief, Rhino, by appealing to his professionalism. But all of this was useless without the trigger event. The unpredictable chaos that would force Elias to bring the satellite phone into my operational sphere. I needed a storm. I needed nature to provide the cover for the final, most reckless act of my life for 5 agonizing days. I tracked the weather patterns from my isolated terminal, praying for the atmospheric disturbance that would allow me to move. Elias's island was built to withstand a Category 3 hurricane. But even his titanium fortress could not prevent the complete temporary disruption of commercial fiber optic and cellular communications. The island's only line of external contact in a catastrophic failure was the dedicated, encrypted emergency satellite phone, my target. Finally, the weather charts began to scream. A fast-moving, high-intensity tropical depression was barreling toward the Caribbean. It wasn't a Category 5, but it was enough to knock out the main communications array for at least 3 hours. I had my window. The plan was a symphony of precision and risk, designed to unfold entirely within a 10-minute window. The maximum time I estimated I could remain unaccounted for without Rhino's system flagging my absence. The plan, codenamed Operation Phoenix, hinged on 5 critical phases. First, the catalyst, initiating the power failure that would force Elias to rely on the emergency phone. Second, the acquisition, gaining the access code from the depleted satellite phone's memory spill. Third, the assembly, recombining the fragmented master ledger and binding it to a single external drive, the emergency satellite phone itself. Fourth, the transmission, using the phone's encrypted satellite line to send the entire ledger package to my pre-designated secure dead drop. Fifth, the re-entry, returning to my terminal, leaving no trace. Before Rhino security logs completed their automated review of the power failure, I had to prepare every element flawlessly. The most critical component was the external drive. Since I was forbidden from carrying any external storage devices, I had to create one from the island's own components. During my final controlled visit to the utility vault, I had secretly swapped out the internal, low-capacity solid-state memory card from the network's automated fire suppression system with a high-capacity, identical-looking card. The fire suppression system ran on a simple, predictable loop, and the swap would not be detected until a mandatory biannual check. The original card, containing the fire system's simple operational code, was now concealed in the lining of my jacket. The high-capacity card, now holding a newly formatted empty partition, was concealed in the heel of my emergency escape shoes. The satellite phone itself would serve as the physical conduit for the master ledger. Its internal memory was secured by the lock, but its external transfer port was powerful enough to transmit my re-encrypted data package. The storm hit at 4 a.m. It arrived with terrifying speed. The wind, a roaring malicious entity, and the transfer was complete. The master ledger safely stored in an encrypted escrow account miles above the storm. I had the proof of treason, but I was still a prisoner. My wrist tethered to the man who would kill me the moment he discovered the full depth of my betrayal. The time for digital subterfuge was over. Elias, still shaken by the near failure of the Aegis during the storm, announced the transfer 2 days later. This was the final stage of his escape. A massive, irreversible consolidation of assets at a secluded, heavily controlled port facility, the operational hub I had identified. Elias required my presence. "You will accompany me, Anya," he commanded, his voice tight. "You are the only one who understands the final liquidity protocols. You will personally ensure the assets are consolidated. Rhino's team will be with us every step of the way. One mistake, one suspicious glance, and you are disposable." This was exactly what I had hoped for. The personal survival kit for the trip was concealed in the lining of my escape shoes. The fire suppression, memory card, the true master ledger, and the original low-capacity card, written over with a simple digital detonator code. The journey was a masterclass in covert security. We flew in Elias's private jet, landing at a small military-controlled airstrip near the port. Rhino and his team formed a steel cage around us. At the port, the atmosphere was charged with high-stakes criminal commerce. The assets, artifacts, bonds, and specialized computer hardware were being moved under the cover of a corporate shipping operation. My target was not a terminal, but Marcus, the logistics man. He was coordinating the physical transfer, his face pale with fear. I knew he was under intense surveillance, but he had chosen his side: survival. During a mandatory check of the cargo manifesta task Elias assigned me to verify the value, maneuvered myself close to Marcus, keeping a barrier of crates between us and the nearest guard. "Cuss," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the loading cranes. "The entire network is already in escrow. You are currently the primary loose end. Elias is preparing to revoke your access and leave you here. You have 30 minutes. His eyes widened in fear. "What do you want?" he stammered. "Your burner phone," I instructed quickly. "Swap it with mine. Now I will give you the one thing that guarantees your freedom. Do not hesitate." Marcus, driven by pure panic, exchanged his active, encrypted communication device with my own dummy phone. I now held the final conduit for my plan. I immediately slipped away to a small, enclosed cargo office, claiming I needed to verify a complex bond transfer log. Elias was too consumed by the physical movement of his fortune to notice the brief absence. I had 30 minutes. The master ledger was in my hands on the tiny memory card. I had to use Marcus's phone to transmit the detonator code and secure my escape. The logic bomb. quickly inserted the original, low-capacity memory card, the one containing the logic bomb, into the port of Marcus's burner phone. Then, using a preloaded transfer app, I sent the simple, devastating code to the island's core network. The code instructed Elias's financial servers to interpret the previously uploaded, fragmented master ledger as legitimate evidence of corporate malpractice, triggering an automated compliance protocol. This would instantly flag the entire $1 billion Aegis structure to every major international financial watchdog group, freezing the funds and linking the fraud directly to Elias's access key. The switch was flipped. I had turned his own compliance system against him. Next, I inserted the master ledger memory card, the true evidence, into the phone and initiated a high-speed data transfer. The destination was my forensic escrow account. I sent a single, simple text message to the trusted law firm managing the escrow account. A prearranged signal. Phoenix is active. Contact SDNY and Treasury. My final digital tasks were complete. I deleted all logs from Marcus's phone and quickly slipped my memory card back into my escape shoes. I walked out of the cargo office, my face radiating the cold confidence of an expert who had just secured billions. The final transfer is clean, Elias, I announced, returning his logistics manager's phone to Marcus with a casual nod. The assets are moving. We can leave. Elias was ecstatic, basking in the supposed triumph of his treason. He ordered Rhino to prepare the vehicles for departure. The operation was a success in his eyes. The chaos began 5 minutes later. It started with a deep, low metallic tone from the port facility, the sound of an automated financial quarantine. Simultaneously, Elias's phone exploded with frantic encrypted calls from his lawyers. Elias, what is happening? All of the Aegis's liquid assets have been flagged. The Swiss accounts are frozen. We have an internal systems report linking the fraud directly to your Chronos access codes. Elias's face went white. He stared at his phone, then at me, the realization of my total betrayal dawning in a flash of murderous fury. You? He whispered, the sound raw and terrifying. You did this. The codes you used my own system against me. The confrontation and escape the moment he spoke. I moved directly to Rhino, whose face was a mask of cold fury at Elias's failure. Rhino, I stated clearly, projecting my voice over the rising panic of the conspirators. The entire operation is compromised. He didn't just sell technology. He framed me for treason and compromised U.S. intelligence assets. The only person who knows how to retrieve the asset is me. I handed him the logic bomb card. This is the system reset for the island's main security grid. If he runs, he will trigger a full permanent lockdown. You can take him into custody here, or you can watch his revenge destroy everything, including your name. The choice is yours. Elias lunged toward me. Before he could touch me, Rhino and his team moved with brutal, practiced efficiency. They slammed Elias against a concrete barrier, pinning him instantly. The money is gone, sir, Rhino stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. The mission is terminated. You are in custody. The port facility immediately descended into chaos as local security forces, alerted by the flagged transfers, began moving in. In the ensuing confusion, my escape vehicle, a small prearranged service transport, pulled up to a side-loading dock. Go, Rhino ordered, releasing me with a curt nod. I had secured my future by leaving him the traitor. I ran. Me to verify the value, I maneuvered myself close to Marcus, keeping a barrier of crates between us and the nearest guard. Marcus, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the loading cranes. The entire network is already in escrow. You are currently the primary loose end. Elias is preparing to revoke your access and leave you here. You have 30 minutes. His eyes widened in fear, confirming the truth of my words. What do you want? He stammered. Your burner phone, I instructed quickly. Swap it with mine. Now, I will give you the one thing that guarantees your freedom. Do not hesitate. Marcus, driven by pure panic, reached into his pocket. We exchanged phones in a single fluid motion masked by the movement of a passing forklift. I now held his active encrypted communication device, the final piece of the transmission puzzle. His phone, which was already authorized to communicate with the local encrypted network, would serve as my final conduit. I immediately slipped away to a small, enclosed cargo office, claiming I needed to verify a complex bond transfer log. Elias was too consumed by the physical movement of his fortune to notice the brief absence. I had 30 minutes. The master ledger was in my hands on the tiny memory card. I had to use Marcus's phone to transmit the detonator code and my own escape plan. I inserted the fire suppression system memory card, the one containing the logic bomb, into the port of his burner phone. Then, using a custom-written transfer app I had preloaded onto the phone weeks ago via my remote connection, I sent the simple, devastating code to the island's core network. The code was not a virus. It was a simple, legalistic instruction. It instructed Elias's financial servers to interpret the previously uploaded, fragmented master ledger as legitimate evidence of corporate malpractice, triggering a predetermined automated compliance protocol. This protocol, designed to look like an internal system failure, would instantly flag the entire $1 billion Aegis structure to every major international financial watchdog group, freezing the funds and linking the fraud directly to Elias's access key. The switch was flipped. I had turned his own compliance system against him. Next, Ka inserted the master ledger memory card, the true evidence, into the phone and initiated a high-speed data transfer. The destination was my forensic escrow account. But this time, the file was routed through a complex, anonymous series of encrypted channels designed to look like a standard high-level intelligence data leak. I sent a simple text message to the trusted law firm managing the escrow account. A pre-ranged signal. Phoenix is active. Contact SDNY and Treasury. My task was complete. The money was frozen, the evidence was sent, and the full weight of the global legal system was about to fall onto Elias Thorne. I deleted all logs from Marcus's phone and quickly swapped my memory card back into my escape shoes. I walked out of the cargo office, heart pounding, but my face radiating the cold confidence of an expert who had just secured billions. The final transfer is clean, Elias, I announced, returning his logistics manager's phone to Marcus with a casual nod. The assets are moving. We can leave. Elias was ecstatic, basking in the supposed triumph of his treason. He ordered Rhino to prepare the vehicles for departure. The operation was a success in his eyes. The chaos began 5 minutes later. It started with a deep, low metallic tone from the core server rack at the port facility, the sound of an automated financial quarantine. Then, simultaneously, Elias's phone exploded with frantic encrypted calls from his lawyers. Elias, what is happening? All of the Aegis's liquid assets have been flagged. The Swiss accounts are frozen. We have an internal systems report linking the fraud directly to your Chronos access codes. Elias's face went white. He stared at his phone, then at the financial screens that had suddenly gone dark. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine, the realization of my total betrayal dawning in a flash of murderous fury. You, he whispered, the sound raw and terrifying. You did this. The virus, the codes you used my own system against me. The moment he spoke, I made my move. I didn't run. I moved directly to Rhino, whose face was a mask of cold fury and professional disappointment at Elias's massive failure. Rhino, I stated clearly, projecting my voice over the rising panic of the conspirators. The entire operation is compromised. He didn't just sell technology. He framed me for treason and compromised U.S. intelligence assets to do it. The local security forces are compromised. Your mission, the protection of the asset, is over. The only person who knows how to retrieve the asset is me. I handed him the simple, low-capacity fire suppression memory card containing the logic bomb code. This is the system reset for the island's main security grid. If he runs, he will trigger a full permanent lockdown. You can take him into custody here, or you can watch his revenge destroy everything, including your name. The choice is yours, professional." Elias lunged toward me, his hands outstretched in blind, murderous rage. Before he could touch me, Rhino and his second-in-command moved with brutal, practiced efficiency. They slammed Elias against a concrete barrier, pinning him instantly. "The money is gone, sir," Rhino stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "The mission is terminated. You are in custody." Rhino looked at me, a silent confirmation passing between the betrayer and the betrayed. He had chosen the stability of his own career and reputation over the ruin of his now penniless employer. The port facility immediately descended into chaos. Local security forces, realizing the scale of the international exposure, began moving in, not to help Elias, but to contain the massive security breach. In the ensuing confusion, my escape vehicle is small. Pre-arranged service transport I had ordered using Marcus's phone pulled up to a side loading dock. "Go," Rhino ordered, releasing me with a curt nod. He had secured his future by capturing the traitor, and I had secured mine by leaving him the proof of his professionalism. I ran the $1 billion confession, and the price of freedom I did not stop running until I reached the airport, blending seamlessly into the flow of commercial travelers. I used a fake passport and untraceable plane ticket booked weeks in advance as part of my escape plan. The master ledger was safe, sent, and already being analyzed by the proper authorities. My life as a fugitive was over, replaced by the grim reality of being the sole witness in a billion-dollar treason case. Back in the U.S., the news of Elias Thorne's arrest sent shockwaves through the global financial community. The evidence, the master ledger authenticated by the forensic escrow account, was irrefutable. It detailed the entire network of corruption, the treasonous sales of intellectual property, and the meticulous planning of the Aegis to shield the funds. The single $100,000 anomaly that started it all was revealed to be the initial access fee for a conspiracy that implicated senators, bank presidents, and high-level corporate directors. Elias, stripped of his fortune and his credibility, confessed almost immediately, trading a few names for a minor reduction in his sentence. He blamed my greed, my manipulation, but the ledger spoke the truth. He was the architect, and I was the indispensable tool he tried to discard. My legal team, armed with the evidence I had provided, approached the U.S. Attorney's Office. The indictment against Anya Petrova was dropped instantly. I was not a criminal. I was the essential witness who had risked her life to expose one of the largest economic conspiracies in history. My name was cleared, but freedom, I learned, has a price far higher than a $1 billion betrayal. The personal cost was absolute. I had won my life back, but I had lost my faith in people, in structures, and in the very idea of security. The glittering world of finance, once my source of pride, now felt tainted by the hypocrisy I had witnessed. I took the $5 million retainer. Elias had paid me the money he had used to buy his own destruction, and created the Aegis Foundation, dedicated to using forensic accounting to expose corruption in corporate and governmental structures. I returned to New York not to resume my old life, but to build a new one dedicated to using the skill that had almost been my ruin as a force for absolute, undeniable justice. I looked at the skyline, no longer seeing the sprawling mansion I had left behind, but the clean, hard lines of a life I was now building from zero, cleansed by the fire of betrayal. I had lost my love, but I had regained my soul. The air in the courtroom was not heavy with typical legal gravity. It was electric with the shock of global treason. The master ledger, delivered from its secure escrow account, was not merely evidence, it was an autopsy report on a sprawling billion-dollar conspiracy. Elias Thorne, stripped of his custom suits and his arrogant facade, sat at the defense table, his face a roadmap of final, bitter defeat. I, Anya Petrova, once the most wanted fugitive in economic history, sat as the prosecution's star witness, the single person who held the key to decoding his entire empire of lies. The strength of the case lay not in testimony, but in the absolute undeniable purity of the forensic data. The prosecution did not rely on emotional narrative. They simply presented the master ledger. They showed the jury the initial $100,000 anomaly I had flagged, the small, miscellaneous signal that proved the existence of the treasonous pipeline. They showed the coded communication logs captured from the island's own servers that revealed Elias's explicit instructions to sell proprietary U.S. defense blueprints to the sanctioned foreign power. The most devastating evidence was the structural design of the Aegis Trust itself. I testified not as a victim, but as the system architect. I explained how the trust was constructed to deliberately disguise state-level espionage payments as legitimate asset transfers, using complex rigidity protocols designed to thwart standard investigative techniques. I detailed how Elias had used his own internal systems, the very systems I was hired to stabilize, to plant the forensic evidence that framed me, turning my professional success into the perfect weapon for his defense. My testimony was not emotional. It was a technical breakdown of betrayal. It was the calm, methodical explanation of how I used a defunct fire suppression memory card and an emergency satellite phone to secure the entire blueprint of his treason, right under his security team's nose. I demonstrated with cold precision how I had turned his specialized security system against him, leveraging his arrogance and his predictable professional mistakes. The public reaction was a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. The names revealed in the master ledger were not minor players. They included a sitting congressman who had secretly voted to approve the sale of the very technology Elias was exporting, a high-ranking official at a major national defense contractor, and the CEO of a Swiss bank that had laundered the funds through a hidden network of asset vehicles. The conspiracy was not a localized corporate crime. It was an intelligence breach that had been allowed to fester at the highest levels of global power. As the weeks of the trial unfolded, my name transitioned completely from fugitive financial mastermind to essential whistleblower and finally, national security asset. The federal indictment against Anya Petrova was formally and publicly vacated. A televised moment of vindication that was both liberating and strangely empty. The legal system, slow and imperfect, had finally corrected the fatal injustice. But the price of that clearance was the public dissection of my most intimate betrayal, Elias. Facing overwhelming evidence and the combined weight of 2 continents' worth of legal scrutiny, eventually broke. He took the stand not to defend himself, but to unleash a final desperate act of narcissistic rage. He confessed, but his confession was not one of remorse. It was a furious, self-justifying outburst. She built the system. She knew how it worked. I was simply taking advantage of the system's inherent design. He screamed, pointing across the courtroom at me. The only reason she exposed me is because I cut her out. This entire prosecution is based on the professional jealousy of a woman who couldn't handle being discarded. His confession was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the confirmation that his betrayal was not a moment of weakness, but a cold, strategic calculation. He affirmed every element of the forensic trap I had described, cementing my narrative. I had not been driven by vengeance, but by the fundamental necessity of survival and the professional imperative to expose the truth. The dismantling of the conspiracy was massive and unprecedented. The congressman resigned moments before he was due to be indicted. The Swiss bank faced colossal fines and sanctions. The entire apparatus of corruption that Elias had constructed crumbled under the weight of the undeniable data. The master ledger, secured by a forensic accountant using a bespoke diagnostic tool and a hurricane, had achieved what years of government surveillance had failed to do. The sentences handed down were severe, reflecting the national security implications of the treason. Elias Thorne was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The other conspirators received decades-long sentences. Justice, in the end, was delivered not by luck or by confession, but by the relentless pursuit of truth embedded in the numbers. I emerged from the courthouse not as a triumphant victim, but as a person profoundly changed by the fire of betrayal. The wealth and luxury that had once defined my life held no appeal. The very idea of working in traditional corporate finance felt repulsive. I was cleared legally, but I was stripped bare emotionally. My path forward was clear. I had to use the unique, painful knowledge I possessed to build something impermeable, something dedicated to turning the tools of deception back against the deceivers. I used the $5 million retainer, the money Elias had paid me to ensure my silence, too, found the Aegis Foundation for Financial Integrity. The name was deliberately chosen. The Aegis was Elias's shield, his ultimate fortress of crime. I had taken his shield and recast it as a sword of absolute justice. The Foundation's mission was to operate outside the bureaucracy of government and corporate compliance, using advanced forensic accounting to target high-level economic espionage and corruption. My new life was defined by quiet, focused determination. I bought a simple, functional apartment in Washington, D.C., near the centers of power I now sought to audit. I surrounded myself not with socialite friends or legal peers, but with a small, highly specialized team of analysts, people whose loyalty was not to status or wealth, but to the cold, hard logic of the financial truth. The work was isolating, but deeply meaningful. We took on cases the government couldn't touch, complex, highly insulated networks of fraud woven into global supply chains and political funding. I was finally using my unique talent, my ability to spot the miscellaneous consulting fee that hid a treasonous billion-dollar payment for its true ethical purpose. My focus became the resilience required to look at the worst elements of human nature and yet still choose to fight. I realized that my intelligence, my forensic skill, was not just a tool for earning wealth. It was a moral obligation. I had defeated a state-level threat, a conspiracy that reached into the highest offices, not with a gun or a badge, but with a spreadsheet, a memory card, and a precise understanding of the enemy's protocols. The deepest resilience was found in the acceptance of the loss. I would never have the simple, trusting life I thought I was building with Elias. The scars of his betrayal were permanent, but they were no longer weaknesses. They were the armor that protected me. The woman who had been framed for treason and hunted across a continent had successfully navigated the most complex financial and personal war imaginable, and she emerged not broken but reborn. The final, essential lesson of that terrifying journey was the power of the overlooked detail. The entire conspiracy hinged on massive, obvious acts of greed, but it was undone by the simple, forensic anomaly that one person was sharp enough to spot and brave enough to question. I defeated a traitorous CEO, a hostile foreign intelligence operation, and a domestic network of corruption with nothing more than my own brain and the willingness to risk everything. My name was cleared. The truth was undeniable. And the foundation I built ensured that the Aegis of justice would continue to operate, silent and unstoppable in the shadows of the financial world. I look out over the city now, not with fear, but with the focused calm of the predator. Elias is in prison, his money is gone, and his network is dismantled. And I, Anya Petrova, the forensic accountant who was supposed to be a disposable asset, am still here, writing the final ledger. My life is dedicated to proving one final, immutable truth. The sharpest weapon in any war, whether financial or personal, it's not brute force or overwhelming wealth, but relentless, unyielding intelligence.